We're coming very close to funding our region-locked book. Be sure to take a look at our project page on Unbound in the description below. FromSoftware are a company best known for their Soulborn series, games with a heavy emphasis on a dark world full of rich lore, as well as a high difficulty level. The company has published games like these for a long time, creating Kingsfield and Ekko Night on the PlayStation, as well as Shadow Tower. While those associated in the Soulborn series weren't necessarily involved in these earlier games, similarities can be drawn between them, with the company's style holding strong across their catalogue. While English players were able to play the original Shadow Tower and Ekko Night, their sequels never saw release outside of Japan. So today we'll be looking at both, starting with Ekko Night 2 for the original PlayStation. Ekko Night 2 was released in 1999, 1 year after the first iteration in the series. Like many FromSoftware games, stories are given by inference rather than clear exposition. In the original Ekko Night, Richard Osmond was searching for his father, discovering an artifact on his journey known as the Red Stone. This stone had magical abilities, granting immense power to those who attached the stone to a knife and kill. Richard also became capable of projecting his consciousness into the ghosts around him, giving him a glimpse into the past. While Ekko Night 2 is a sequel to the original game, Richard never acknowledges the events or story from the first release. It's likely the sequel was created as a way to revisit the concepts and themes of the first game and honing its original ideas, as opposed to continuing the story. The story of Ekko Night 2 follows the Clancy family. Jessica Clancy has fallen deathly ill, leading her husband and the game's main antagonist, Albert Clancy, to follow an ancient ritual in order to save her life. He is the heir to his family estate, who were English nobility that settled in America. He has since inherited their assets. They have been researching the ruins on their estate and have an artifact in their possession called the Soul Stone. It does almost the same thing as the Red Stone from the original game, but it isn't the Red Stone, it's the Soul Stone. Rather than give power, the Soul Stone is charged and starts to glow when enough people are killed. This allows its wielder to grant immortality to somebody if they have a twin, by sacrificing the other twin with the Soul Stone. At the start, Albert has killed almost everyone on his estate in order to charge the stone. He intends to kill Christina Collins, Richard Osmond's girlfriend, and Jessica Clancy's twin sister. A red-headed woman seems to be working with Albert, who several generations ago was sick like Jessica. Her twin performed the Soul Stone ritual and cured her, making her immortal, not being able to die from age or injury. She approached Albert after seeing Jessica's situation in order to assist him with the Soul Stone. The player takes on the role of Richard Osmond as he tries to find his girlfriend who has been missing for 3 months. She was last seen around the library of the college in which she works. Police have had no luck in the situation since her disappearance, and so Richard decides to get involved, setting out for the college. Finding a book containing a photograph of Jessica Clancy, his girlfriend's twin, leads him to believe that she may have gone to the Clancy estate, where his investigation begins. Similar to the original Ekko Night in many ways, the game is a first-person adventure game with no weapons. The player must solve the mysteries surrounding the events unfolding around them by exploring the Clancy residence and finding clues. The player can pick up objects and inspect them. Richard sees ghosts around the mansion, and his spirit is capable of traveling through time, showing him the memories of the dead. In these memories, he is able to interact with the environment around him physically and can transport objects through time. Though sometimes he will have physical form, and sometimes he will simply be there to observe the events unfolding. Richard helps the spirits of the manor pass on by solving their problems. While some ghosts are friendly, some aren't, and they will attack the player. The only defense against ghosts is lights. The player must escape danger by turning a room's lights on. Ultimately, the player must collect astral pieces by helping spirits and progress to one of 4 different endings. The game has several unused items as found by users of the cutting room floor. 3 items can be found in the game's data which serve no function, and without names, or simply botsu, meaning unused. These are what appears to be a ring, a talisman on a string, and a pair of glasses. There are also 2 unused rooms. One which has a name linking it to the campus library, featuring a man laying on the ground wielding a knife, with a woman approaching him. The other has names linking it to the past, or prior to the events of the game, suggesting it were to be a part of an unused prologue. The room is fully fleshed out, though lacks collision detection. When entering this room, the line November 1965 and Anchor City, America are displayed, with a line reading, "It's almost time." Another remnant is an unused intro to the game, which differs in how the player arrives at the game's primary location, the Clancy Mansion. These unused locations, as well as the changed introductory cutscene, reveals that how the game's opening would unfold had changed during production. Originally, Christina was a college graduate who went missing on the day of her graduation. There are several Easter eggs throughout the game too, such as the page of the old book in the introductions library revealing the setup for the first Ekko Night. There's also another page in the game's data which is never shown, showing a phrase in reverse. It reads, "That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die. Hurrah for HPL." This line is an extract from the Necronomicon written by H.P. Lovecraft, followed by "Hurrah for HPL." A newspaper in the game is also called Sarnath Voice, a reference to a story by Lovecraft entitled The Doom That Came to Sarnath. There are also many more small pieces in the data that go completely unused, from dialogue lines to images. With regards to why Ekko Night 2 never saw a release in the West, it can be assumed that FromSoftware or AgeTech treated the release of the first Ekko Night as a way of testing how the game would be received. The original Ekko Night was published in North America on August 30th, 1999, less than a full month after Ekko Night 2 released in Japan. As the first Ekko Night was met with a generally mixed reception in the West, it would have likely been an unwise financial decision to release the sequel as well. The game features extensive voice acting, and these lines would have probably required redubbing for approval overseas, increasing localization costs. In 2015, a fan translation was created by Gemini and Tom from Devil Hackers. In 2008, the two decided to work on translating the game, making quick progress but ultimately stopping after a few months. 7 years later, they gave it another stab and had finished translation in a window of around 3 weeks, implementing their translation and roughly 10 days of revisions and tests. The duo gave the game the subtitle of The Lord of Nightmares, rather than directly translating the game's Japanese title, which would be more in the line of Master of Slumber. This was after finding the phrase Lord of Nightmare on one of the game's items, and simply adding an S to it. They had hoped to redub the game into English as well, but with so many characters involved in the game's events, this was not feasible. Shadow Tower Abyss was released for the PlayStation 2 in late 2003, exclusively to Japanese audiences. Being the sequel to a game which came 4 years prior, the game sees the return of the Citadel locale, as well as several characters. The game's story involves the player, an explorer, who is in search of a magical spear which was said to have given great powers to the now-deceased ruler of the kingdom, bringing with it an age of unparalleled prosperity and peace. While much of the kingdom is now covered in a large forest, the Citadel, an intimidatingly large tower, still remains. While in search of the Citadel, the explorer becomes trapped within, giving him only a single means of escape: to reach the top of the structure. Much of the game's world is shrouded in mystery, with many creatures providing sparsely given context to their existence, giving only small snippets of backstory. Shadow Tower Abyss plays similarly to the original Shadow Tower, albeit with some minor changes. The game is played from a first-person perspective while also making use of RPG mechanics. While the player doesn't level up from killing enemies in the traditional sense, they do gradually grow with each kill, slightly increasing their stats. It's also possible to bolster stats through finding and releasing souls. With melee weapons, the player can attack with a left or right swipe, a thrusting motion, or an overhead strike. The variety of weapons provide different strengths and weaknesses, with some weapons providing better damage with different types of attack. Stamina is displayed as orbs, showing the player how many attacks can be stored for quick successive hits, with some weapons allowing for more attacks in succession than others. Enemies can have specific body parts targeted, allowing for dismemberment and decapitation. The player is also able to make use of firearms, though without a reticule for precise aiming, and with a relatively limited supply of ammunition throughout the tower. The player can also find rings that grant the ability to cast magic. As with melee attacks, magic abilities have a limited number of uses in quick succession, as well as draining the player's MP. As the player progresses, they will find themselves with a wide variety of equipment, a major element to the game's survival mechanics. As the player has a limited weight capacity, they will find that they will need to dispose of items as to not become over-encumbered. While the player can drop items or sell them at a store, they are also capable of sacrificing equipment in order to regain a portion of their health and mana. Equipment will also begin to deteriorate over time through use, meaning that the player may need to consider how much equipment they keep with them in order to use some for restoration purposes, as well as swapping items out as they become damaged. The game's map takes place across several areas of the tower, with many having different appearances to one another. While the player is able to view statistics of how much they've explored each location at any time, there is no map, with the exception of infrequent drawings on walls left by previous explorers, meaning the player must memorize their route or face becoming lost in the tower's corridors. Many of the game's NPCs can also be attacked and killed, regardless of whether they are considered antagonists or not. While Shadow Tower Abyss never received a release internationally, there was the intention to begin with. The game was announced in 2001 with a demonstration version of the title presented at the Tokyo Game Show in September of 2003. At the time, it was the only RPG that FromSoftware was demonstrating, and the only game from their lineup which wouldn't ultimately go on to be released in the West. The game's English localization was being handled by Agetec, though it unfortunately never saw the light of day, as the project was cancelled during the localization stage. Mark Johnson, who worked as Agetec's producer at the time, made the announcement on the official Sony Computer Entertainment of America website that the game would not see an English release. Expanding on his statement, he posted to the company's forum explaining more about how the lack of release was a result of Sony's decision-making. Johnson claimed that Sony had expressed concerns over the game's projected sales outside of Japan, where it had ranked 14th overall for its first week of release, selling just under 13,000 units in its first 6 days. Sony was also worried that the quality of the game's visuals weren't able to compete with those seen in both rival RPGs and first-person genres. Johnson sorrowfully stated, "I've been in this industry now for over 10 years, and this was by far the hardest thing for me to accept, and I did everything possible to fight for its release. While it was an epic battle, it was unfortunately one that was lost. Petitioning to Sony would do nothing. Once they reject a title, it is final. Nothing whatsoever will ever change that." To add salt to the wound, Johnson claims that much of the localization had already been completed, with the only things that had not been finished being the game's packaging and instruction manual. Johnson clearly cared for this project, even offering to provide the translated US text to anybody interested if they simply emailed him and asked for it. While not receiving an official localization, the game did receive a fan translation several years later in 2011, created by Maud of Swoonlight and John Osborne on the Sword of Moonlight community forums. As we said before, we're currently fundraising for a book about region-exclusive games, and we're close to reaching our goal. If you'd like to help support the show and get a book in return, take a look at our Unbound page in the description below. Welcome to 69 FM Patreon Radio for all your spooky nighttime driving needs. Today, D180223 held a press conference on behalf of Chad Barnin regarding Clefairy's disappearance. Corey Nelson asked if Hector Amarillo was connected to the string of missing patrons, with Malcavio backing up the idea, proclaiming he saw Robert Cox spying on the three master gamers earlier this week. Trevor Wooten and Vitas Vanis haven't been seen since last month, suggesting your boy Beowulf was heavily involved. In other news, Jetto7 and Gary CXJK have started a new awareness campaign that the Phantom Sonic says is absolutely smashing. The Natch, Mike Sinistar, and Skunk Starlight have all crashed their cars into fallen trees over the past week. So remember, watch out for these wayward woodland wankers. Up next is Gary Newman with Cars. Thanks to all of our beautiful patrons for helping us continue to make these videos. Hopefully, you're enjoying them as well, and maybe you could consider lending some support if you're able. If not, you could always just help out with a simple like on this video, or perhaps just leave a comment about what you think about these games. Let us know your early FromSoft game memories. I used to have a few, actually, Cookies and Cream and Eternal Ring. Anyway, ta-ta for now.